Good morning, Olivia. How are you today?
Good morning, Steve. I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. Welcome to obviously Race and STEM to everybody who has not engaged with us before. It's a community and a platform where I myself, Steve Fuller, speaks to great people within the industry of STEM. And these great people happen to be mainly people of color, where we identify a number of great things as well as challenging things. We bring it to the form of discussion just to see how we can open some doors in terms of how people think in general. And today I'm joined by the Olivia Cream, who's based stateside. So Olivia, one of the things in which I like to do is pause a lot of thought process. I like to go with some very interesting, deep questions to begin with. And I'm going to ask you the same to begin with before we learn a little bit more about you. And I want to know, as a person of color, what does today's world of STEM look like through your eyes?
I think we are still, at least in the States, a space where a lot of people of color are still shying away from STEM. Now, the numbers, if you look at the numbers, our trend is going up. So we are getting more people of color interested in STEM, but it's still pretty disproportionate to our majority peers. So you have to ask yourself the question, well, what's going on? And, I do a lot of mentoring and a lot of work in the community. And a lot of what I hear specifically from Black and Brown women is that they don't see themselves represented in STEM.
Okay.
So when I show up for a career day, when you're going to colleges or you're talking to younger women, and they look at you and they're like, "What? You used to be an engineer?" It kind of comes as a shock because there's this lack of representation. So
Mhm.
I think we still have a lot of work to do to highlight the folks that are in STEM currently so that we can inspire the next generation.
Okay. There's a lot right there in that 2 minute answer that you've already allowed for me to kind of grab onto and discuss later on. But tell us about you, your background. Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, my background is so interesting, Steve. As I tell you this, people are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, like you had no idea where you were going." And I promise you that was not the case. But for our listeners, I am an immigrant, so I grew up in Jamaica. I was the only girl. I had three brothers in the house. And I knew from pretty early on that I wanted to be an engineer. One of my mother's biggest complaints is I used to take apart everything in the house to try to figure out how it worked. And this was before I figured out how to put it back together. So I was taking apart stereos, I was taking apart toasters, anything I could get my hands on that I could take it apart to figure out how all the little components inside worked. I was doing it. And then from there in high school, I got a little bit more into engineering and I used to work on cars with my brothers and race them. So we would do like, not like drifting or anything crazy, just on the drag strip, straight line, just for power. And that was really exciting. So when it was time to apply for colleges, I actually got a flyer in the mail from the United States Coast Guard Academy.
Okay.
And they had a summer program called Minority Introduction to Engineering, MITE. And right away, it grabbed my attention. And I will tell you, I got two invites, one from the Navy and one from the Coast Guard. But of course, being a teenager, the Navy application, you had to write like this 3-page essay, and it was like $200. I was like, no thanks. And the Coast Guard application, was like a simple one pager, and I think the fee was like $50 or something like that. So I chose that path instead. And my word, Stephen, when I got to the Coast Guard Academy, the campus was so beautiful. It was so hilly. It's there in New London, Connecticut,
Okay.
across the river from the submarine base. And so it's this beautiful, sprawling campus, and we got to build robots and kind of fight them. Think BattleBot type of
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
activity, and I was sold. On top of that, my family tends to be pretty fiscally conservative. And as immigrants, we didn't have a ton, we didn't have a surplus of money
Hmm.
for college funds and things like that. So that was definitely top of mind for me. And what was wonderful for the Coast Guard is I got my mechanical engineering degree with no student loan. I owed 5 years of service after that, which I did happily.
Hmm.
And I got to travel the world. I got practical engineering experience.
Hmm.
My time in the Coast Guard was absolutely invaluable. So in the Coast Guard, I spent most of my time on boats or shoreside doing a lot of the maintenance projects for the boats as they would come in. So
Hmm.
large multi-million dollar contracts where you're responsible for everything. If it has an on-off button, if it's water flowing, anything on the ship that required some work fell kind of under my purview. And then the job itself was counter migrants and drugs, and we operated down in the Caribbean, and it was a blast. I mean, it was a lot of hard work. We sacrificed a ton, but it was so much fun. And then from there, I met my husband, who was also a Coast Guard engineer. And, like meets like. And so, we quickly realized that we wanted to be together. And so he stayed in and continued his career in the Coast Guard. And I transitioned out into the civilian space to the company that I am currently at now. And
Hmm.
I will tell you that transition was foundational for me. You lose a little bit of your sense of identity in that transition. So I kind of started over, and I'm a planner, and that was very nerve-wracking for me because this was not part of the plan. So within the company that I work now, I started in supply chain. And then after a couple of years, my husband got stationed in Michigan. So we started off in California. He got stationed in Michigan. So we needed to move. And that prompted the change into HR. So at that point, I went to my HR department and said, I clearly can't do the supply chain job remotely. This was 2015, before remote work was really a thing. And my kudos to my leader at the time. I had no idea what HR was. She offered me, she said, "Hey, we have this opportunity in HR supporting the commercial business, supporting sales. Would you be interested?" And Steven, you guys are going to laugh at me, but at the time I was like, I have no idea what HR does. Does HR like plan parties? Like what does HR do? No idea. No idea. And then with my prior military
Uh,
background and
yeah.
the story about how I met my husband, I was like, I feel like I'm already kind of an HR nightmare, so I don't know how this is gonna work. But
Uh,
she talked me into it, and it was a steep ramp up. But what I realized is, much like mechanical engineering is the science of machinery,
mhm,
HR is just the science of people. And so
mhm.
I was able to leverage the same thought process that I used in the engineering space in the HR space. Um, and I'm still here today. Absolutely love it. And that brings us up to speed to here talking to
Okay.
you today.
Okay. Good. Thank you for the overview. Especially like the early years, when you were, clearly auditioning for being a member of the Fast and Furious franchise with your brother. The whole drag racing, speed, and all that kind of stuff. Brilliant. And your definition of HR, as we know, to many people it might be something different to what you allegedly said it could be in terms of party planning. But the obvious fact is that you are a woman of color, and I'm curious as to how within HR, especially, what your role looks like within HR and STEM in general, being a woman of color.
Great question. So I really feel like HR is a critical role when we
Mm,
think about how people work and how people fit in to kind of that corporate construct. Okay.
mhm,
HR can be a blessing or it can be a curse. And that's just a true story. And I like to describe myself as not your grandmother's HR. Okay.
Okay.
And so I focus a lot on the strategic components of our human capital strategy. So I'm really thinking to myself, okay, what is our commercial strategy? And how do our people align with that commercial strategy? Let me explain what I mean. So, if our commercial strategy is that we're moving into a digital space, but we have an overwhelming amount of mechanical engineers. As an HR leader, I would say, okay, we don't need to hire any more mechanical engineers based on where our commercial product pipeline is going. We need to start bringing in people with some software engineering skills, some digital engineering skills. Maybe it's IT folks that we're looking for based on where our product pipeline is going.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, our mission, or what should be our mission as HR professionals, is to find the best talent as quickly as possible to fill this talent pipeline so that the commercial business is not waiting on us to find talent. Now, there are some nuances in this search for talent. What we cannot argue anymore, because McKinsey did a really good job of putting data around this, is
Mm.
that diverse teams outperform non-diverse ones. That's a fact. Like, I'm unwilling to argue about that at this point in my
Fine.
career because it's been
Okay.
documented so many times. So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about engineers solving problems, that's what they do. That's what we do, right? We're problem solvers. So when you think about engineers solving problems, if you have a homogeneous team of engineers, you are going to solve a problem from a particular lens. Okay. The best engineering teams are diverse. Most all teams, the best teams are diverse, but specifically for engineers, because you're bringing your human experiences into the problem solving. And so now you're not just getting a solution, you're getting the best solution when you have a diverse team. In the absence of diversity, let me tell you what happens. I'll give you a prime example. So during COVID, um, companies cranked out the oximeters, right? It's the thing that you put on your finger that tells you what your blood oxygen level is. Well, couple months, I'd say 6 to 8 months into COVID, people realized that the invention of the oximeter was never tested on dark skin. And
Okay.
so it was giving erroneous results in terms of the blood oxygen level because the team that developed this product was homogenous. And so no one was thinking, how is this going to affect the entire population, not just the population that is represented by those engineers that created this product? That is why it is so important to have men, women, all shades of people working in the engineering field so that we are creating the best solution for humanity, not just a solution, if that makes sense.
I understand. I hear what you're saying, and I know where you're going. Um, to those, going back to your HR specific details as to what your job entails specifically. To those who see HR as, you know what, we just need, you mentioned there's a timeline. You know, we need to get people in seats of engineers, regulatory affairs, whatever it is. We just need the talent in, the best talent in. Let's just get the talent in, okay? We don't care about where they're from. We don't care about the color of their skin. We don't care about what gender they might be or if they identify in any way, shape, or form as man, woman, they, them, etc., etc. Okay. So to those listening to this discussion, when you have a timeline of I need to get bums on seats versus what you've said in regards to how it's been shown and documented that diverse teams outperform and are levels above those that aren't, what do you say to those people? Because there's a business need here.
Mm-hmm. I say you should care. What does your
But do they
revenue
but
look like?
but do they have to wait? You know, if they're saying we need a director and all this type of stuff in within the next, 3 months because they have someone leaving the organization, you know, think about notice periods and things like that. The director's off. We've not found anyone yet. We're actually running short on time. We just need someone in the seats, Olivia. Can you just make a hire, please? At that junction, are we not thinking, are you not thinking, well, hang on, let's look at the structure of the team. We have 2 white men, we've got 2 white women. We have 2 Asian men, 2 Asian women. We have a mix of different races. We need to make sure that the next hire is of a diverse background, or, what do you say to those people?
I say, give me a second.
Okay.
Just give me trust me and give me a second, because good HR leaders are creating those talent pipelines before the need even exists. See, our job is always to be recruiting. If you are doing your HR job well, you already have tentacles. I call them my little tentacles everywhere. You have diverse recruiting groups that you're partnering with. You have our historically Black colleges that you've partnered with to bring in diverse folks into your intern pipeline. You have women organizations, women in STEM organizations that you've partnered with. So when the need arises, you have this network of organizations or talent pipelines or people that you've been talking to on LinkedIn that you've been keeping warm that you can quickly pull from, right? If you as an HR leader is starting from scratch every time there is an opening in your team, you are not doing this job effectively.
Well, that's sharing what a number of people would say or would like to believe, sharing good practice, what you've just explained there, which is excellent. But there are a number of professionals who probably are not doing that. So it's good to kind of hear from your perspective your thoughts on that, because I think that's important to identify from honest, and that because that transcends across all different sectors, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier on you felt a little bit more fragile when you were making transition from serving into the more commercial industry that you're in now. Confidence might have been blown a little bit. You've been working and serving for how many years was it?
Oh my gosh, at that time it was probably eight years.
8 years you've been serving. You had probably grown in confidence in that field, beyond belief. Experienced things which, many people might not have been told, or, you could hear when you're hands-on, things like that in general. From your perception, and to maybe those that are like, you can't speak for others, but you can maybe have an understanding. How has a lack of representation, particularly for women of color, in STEM space impacted confidence? And start with your confidence.
Oh my gosh, Stephen. So I actually have a keynote speech that I do specifically on this topic. And it's called Only One in the Room. Okay. Now, what I will tell you is, as a child, and this is probably a symptom of growing up with 3 brothers, I was pretty confident, right?
So there are 4 of you in total?
4 total. I'm the lone girl.
Okay.
Yes.
The one and only.
Yes, always and only. But growing up, I think I was fairly confident because I was always competing with my brothers. Okay. Then I moved into the mechanical engineering space, and I will tell you, at the academy, that rocked my confidence. The reason it rocked my confidence is, out of whatever size, and I can't recall now, this was so many years ago, I don't want to date myself by telling you how many years, but out of our class of engineers, there were only, if I recall, there were like 7 women. I was the only Black female in the engineering program. And I believe there were 2 of us that graduated that year in 2004 with a degree in engineering. And I think the other gal may have been either an electrical or a civil engineer. I can't recall now, but there were only 2 of us. And the academics on top of the military service was very, very difficult, very difficult. So for the first time in my life, I was getting C's. I still, to this day, differential equations. Oh my God, that class was the absolute worst. It was my first C, and it was the hardest thing to deal with. Now, when I moved out into the field in 2009, I became one of two first Black female engineer officers the Coast Guard had ever had. See,
Wow.
so when you talk about confidence and the lack of it at this moment, because I think there's something to be said about seeing yourself represented in the field that you want to be in. Now, I will tell you, I am a big proponent of fake it till you make it. So even though internally I was very insecure. I mean, I'm pouring down sweat, I'm kind of like a duck. You see me on the surface and you're like, oh, Olivia has it together. And my little feet are just pedaling underwater that you can't see. It was something constantly I was asking myself, can I do this job? Did I mess this up? Did I take a wrong path? Should I really be here? And funny story, my now husband was actually when I showed up to the vessel that I met him on. I was young. I showed up 3 years earlier than I should have. So typically, a student engineer, will go to a master's program. So you get your graduate degree, and then you go take command. The stars aligned for me, and I got tapped early. So I did not complete my graduate degree before coming to this vessel to take command. So I was very young, in my late 20s. And when I got there, it's a crew of 85 people. There were about 30 something people in the engineering department, not a single female, not a single person of color. Okay. So probably within the first week, I thought to myself, okay, I need to get down there with the guys. I need to work alongside of them so they know that I know what I'm doing. And I could also observe them as they were working. So when I decided it was time to make changes, I could feel confident that I knew exactly what was going on. And I had built some trust with these men because they saw me in the grease, in the diesel, surrounded by parts with them, sweating with them in the engine room. So I had developed some equity, right? I felt the need to do this because I believed that they were going to question my competence, that they were going to question whether I was the right leader for them. And in the military, if you've got your people questioning you, that could be a life or death thing, right?
Yeah.
They have to believe in you as a leader. And my husband at the time, probably a week in, said to me, men won't follow a female engineer. And shortly after that, when I started to make changes, the EO, the engineer officer that was there before I was Dan's best friend. Dan is my husband. It was his best friend. And so when I started to make changes, our first argument, he said to me, and I'm going to try not to swear because military people, our language is colorful. So he said to me, well, that's not how Jason does things. And I looked at him and I said, last time I checked, I don't have a penis and my name isn't Jason.
Okay. And that was love at first sight.
Love at first sight, right? So that's, these things, and that's an extreme example, right?
Yeah.
But these microaggressions, McKinsey gave it a name, but these microaggressions happen to you. And if you are not careful, you will get run off from this industry if you are not grounded in your capabilities, your competency, and so hyper focused on where you want to go. If you are not grounded in that internally, it becomes a very, very difficult thing.
Olivia, this is interesting because, you're a woman who has experience working in what would be perceived to be a tough environment, okay? Where you fairly fell in love with your now husband, Dan. And you work in an industry now that through the STEM field in HR, yes, I'm sure a lot of your practices from when you were serving can be used as examples of how to go about your day-to-day in your job. Let's look at it very hard fact. I'm a leader. You need to take the bull by the horn. You mentioned earlier on, you fake it till you make it. So you keep trying until you find the answers. What would you say to younger people? I'm not going to say younger women specifically, but just young people in general. What's your advice for Black youngsters coming up whose confidence may have been impacted due to lack of representation?
I would say this: the ceiling is in your head. You can do anything that you want to do. Now, I'm not going to promise you that the road is going to be easy. You're going to have to saddle up. You're going to have to prepare for war. It is going to be a battle, but you can do anything that you want. And if you want to change this world, we have to start being the change that we want to see in this world. You cannot be afraid. Do it, whatever you want to do it afraid. You will find your people along your path. You will gain advocacy along your path. But the most important thing is that you believe in yourself. You cannot surrender your power by waiting for someone else to believe in you. You believe first. The belief of others will come along the way.
That's great. There's a lot of people who suffer. They clearly don't have the get up and go attitude. They really do consider themselves to be that introvert. So how can those people gain confidence? I mean, yes, the ceiling is a barrier in your head, but how can I actively, if I see myself as being what people might consider to be a nerd, the old school definition of that, or somebody who might be weak in physical and mental shape, but I want to be, a director of tech, or I want to be a global HR director or a manager or even just consult. I lack in confidence of being able to speak to a panel. We hear a lot at the moment about community groups, for example. But what do you say, and how would you advise those people who are genuinely, like, they're fearful? It's a real fear factor in their spirit. What would you advise to that person to do?
Just do it. And I know it sounds simple. Just do it is such a, I mean, I'm stealing from Nike here, but they're onto something. And I'm telling you, Stephen, for me growing up, right? I was an introvert as well. The
Yep.
charismatic Olivia that you see today is a learned behavior. I was the stereotypical nerd. Like, I did not want to talk to people.
Yeah.
I did play sports. I was a soccer player. I started off as a goalkeeper, and eventually moved to a forward. But if you talk to my old teammates, they'd be like, oh yeah, Olivia's not coming out. Olivia's not hanging out pre or post game. Like, I'm coming in, I'm doing what I need to do, and I'm going home. Right?
Yeah.
So in terms of being an introvert, I very much was that introvert. I preferred machinery over people. It was quiet. It was less complicated. 1+1 = 2. It was
Mm.
very easy for me to understand. Now, what I will tell you is no one can externally motivate you to accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish. You have to get comfortable with two things. One, the fear. The fear
Yep.
is never going to leave you. I'm still fearful every day, Stephen. When I
Mm-hmm.
have to do a talk in front of our entire corporation, a town hall or something, I'm sweating. You'll see me wearing black because I am profusely sweating underneath this. Okay. The fear is still there. The fear is still there. I'm not going to lie to you and give you some, psychological nonsense that says the fear is going to away. It doesn't go away. You just get used to it and you work through it. And in terms of failure, we also have, I think, I can only speak for the Black community because that's the community that I'm a part of, but I have a lot of Black women and a lot of Black men that are like, I am the only, if I go after this and I don't get it, then I am now representing my entire race and everybody's going to think that Black people can't do these jobs. Please stop. We are not talking about the entire world. We are talking about you. And you have to get comfortable with failure because that's how you learn, right? So if you're going to fail, Fail fast, get up, dust yourself off, and try again. Nothing great comes from inaction. The best thing that you can do is get moving, fail, learn a lesson, do it again. But here's the trick. Don't repeat the same mistake twice. Every time you fail, every time you make a mistake, that is a lesson. It is not the end point. Learn the lesson, build upon it, and move on, and just operate within the fear, because at least for me, it never goes away. You just get stronger. You get stronger by doing hard things more. So just get moving. Just do it.
It's very true. I think about myself. I think about athletes, musicians, artists who I know, and they go into a persona when they're on stage, and then when they come off stage, they're probably the most humblest, quietest, shy person ever. But they had a dream of being that artist. You have, it might be hard to believe, but you have boxers, who are absolute machines in the ring, heavyweight, lightweight. They're skilled in an art, clearly. However, after all the press conferences have happened, all the expletives have been shared, the cameras are off, and they go home to their wife and children, or to their husband and children, and they're much more mellow. And each experience is a learning curve, and I guess you just learn bit by bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're learning bit by bit after each experience of how to build up your own confidence.
Yes.
And I guess surrounding yourselves with like-minded people as well can help. But as well, surrounding yourselves with people who don't see things the way in which you do also helps. You've already given me, I guess, your philosophy of experiencing, loss of confidence and, rejection, stroke failure in general there. And there is a lot which I still want to uncover in terms of your experiences, Olivia, especially from a military perspective, because I think that's an exciting story. As well as your marital status, actually, well, not status, but I know that Dan, he is not a Black man. So uncovering some of those discussions, I'm sure, would be really interesting. But as we bring this conversation to a close, I'd like to know if you can tell me 3 things you'd like to see when moving towards a future change, if possible. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but 3
Now,
things.
when you say a future change, you mean a future change in the world, a future change in STEM, a future change, or just in general, whatever future change I'm thinking about?
I'm going to go with a future change for people of color, specifically in STEM.
Okay. I would like us to be more sure that we can do whatever it is that we want. And I would like us to encourage each other more. When someone shares a big dream, we do this. When someone shares a big dream, we tend to go into this immediate analysis. Well, why would you do that? And how do you see this playing out? And how are you going to connect these dots? And I don't think that's right for you. And sometimes what happens to us, it's our own inner circle that kills our dreams.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I want for us is for us to encourage each other to dream, right? To dream big dreams, to dream dreams that you're like, I don't know if this is going to happen, but Stephen, you know what? If anybody can make it happen, you can. I'm cheering you on. How can I support you? What can I do to help you? I want us to change our dialogue from that's impossible. That's not going to happen. How are you going to make this work? You don't have any money. You don't have any resources. Instead of pointing out all of the things that may very well be true that could crush someone's dream, let's encourage each other to reach for the stars so that we help build that confidence that might create, the next leader, that might create the next world scientist, that might create the next engineer that develop something that sets us all free. Let's encourage each other to dream instead of killing those dreams early on for whatever reason.
Mm, I like that one. I have a lot of people who contact me and a lot of people who say, can you share information? And in between the dreams and encouraging, I hear stories of you reach out to people for support to help promote, but then that person or that company doesn't see that same vision as yours. So then it becomes somewhat bitter, or, they don't feel or see the same way in which you do. Um, and I guess that also kind of links into your first statement, which is be bold. If something's not happening, be bold enough to make it happen another way. I interviewed someone just yesterday for a podcast specifically, and he's approaching, his later years, if you will, of work. And I said to him the same thing, if you could speak to yourself, say 40 years ago, what advice would you give? And he simply said, back then in the 80s ish, starting out, he would have wanted himself to be heard a lot more, to be louder, so that he could be taken and be seen in a certain way, as opposed to being quieter, going with the flow. If he was louder, he might have got certain places a lot quicker because he was always skilled. He could always back himself, uploading, upgrading his skill sets in general. So those 2 points, not three, but those 2 points I really, 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 really do like. And I thank you for your insights into the world of Olivia.
Well,
As
Stephen,
I said,
before you move on, I just want to say this because
uh-oh,
this is
uh-oh,
burning inside of me right now.
oh, go on.
And you just said something. You said, when you run up against those obstacles, sometimes it turns people bitter. I want to say to our audience, no is not rejection, it's redirection. Okay? No is not rejection, it's redirection. And you have to find your tribe. Okay. And sometimes your tribe doesn't look like you. Okay. So, in my pursuit of my goals, and first of all, step one, you need to know what it is you want. A lot of us, when I ask them and they come to me, I'm so available. You know that, Stephen. People come to me all the time and they're like, can you help me? Sure, absolutely. I'm excited to. What do you want? Where do you want to be? And they just look at me. You have to know what you want first. When you know what you want and you have burned the boats and you've decided this is what I want and come hell or high water, this is going to happen. I promise you the universe will align and send you the resources, the people, the support that you need to reach your goal. But you need to know what it is that you want. And you need to be so resolved that you're going to get what you want that even if you come upon a million no's, you only need one yes, right? So just keep going. And if one path isn't working, try another path. There are infinite paths to what it is that you want. And I promise you, the people, the resources, the tools that you need will come. Just stay the course.
I don't need to say anything. Just stay the course. I think that's great. I can take something. I take something from you all the time, but I think that's a really good ending note and a good message. Stay the course. And if it hasn't, then obviously, as you've heard Olivia, or to our listeners, sorry, Olivia has said, just believe, trust it. She believes it, promise it, speak it into existence.
Yes.
Speak it into existence. So, but listen, can we have another conversation in regards to some military stuff and to, marriage life, and how all of these interesting things and worlds come together within your space? That'd be much appreciated. And I look forward to catching up with you offline as well shortly. Thank you so much, Olivia. Much appreciated.
It is a pleasure to be a partner with you, Stephen. It's great chatting every time.
Good, good. Take care.